Let me ask this then. So they get in, right? You guys have picked them. And I want to start with you, Andreas, because I want to ask you to go deeper in your concept of empathy, because you suggested that we shouldn't interfere. Yet all of you provide services using grant dollars in most cases, or in many cases, to support these entrepreneurs. So clearly we're saying, certainly Andy is saying, that there are subsidies that are needed to support these entrepreneurs in most countries. So you can talk about that concept about what type of subsidy is necessary, but as you do that, talk about the kinds of services and support that you provide these entrepreneurs besides capital, and we're going to come to the capital section.
I love the question. So the winner of these of the Pioneers of Prosperity Awards receives $100,000 of an investment in their company, and there are some issues with nonprofit and so on. It's meant to be an investment in the company. How we have to do it financially as a nonprofit is another thing, and we're not really in it for the investment. Our goal is to shine the light on these role models that are local, and believe it or not, but the money, the investment helps with that. Everybody talks about them. But as far as empathy is concerned, I don't like it that we measure poverty with $2 a day. It's very demeaning, and it doesn't say anything. Often the problem, if you want to find a good solution, you should spend most of your time defining the problem and asking the right question. And this dollar per day thing is just a way that a statistician comes up with it because it's easy to measure. But if you really look at it, the condition of being poor, what we like to say at 7 is to be poor is to be excluded from networks of productivity and exchange. Let me just say that one more time. To be poor is to be excluded from networks of productivity and exchange. One of the things that we're doing, and you're going to have to give me, I could talk forever about this because I feel really emotional about this. One of the things we're doing in this aid business, in this poverty business, is that we're creating separate networks for the poor. It's like at my family dinners. I come from a huge family in Switzerland, and the kids have to eat in the kitchen, and the adults they're at the big table. And then when the kids come in, they say, "Hey, you sit over there in the kitchen at the table." That's what we're doing to Africa, because we're closing our networks of productivity and exchange to them in 100 million different ways. That we don't let them into our markets, we don't let them into our financial mechanisms. But then to make ourselves feel good, we make a little fair trade shop and say, why don't you go there? If this is not a new form of colonialism, I don't know what is. And so now we say, we have the Pioneers of Prosperity. What can we do? We approach it with this idea of saying, how do I integrate? And I don't even like the term integrate myself. How do you give access or integrate the poor or poor countries into networks of productivity and exchange? That is our mission then at 7, where we go around and we say, business by business, what is it that you need? Your business plan. You can get feedback and things like that, but then to integrate into our networks, to bring them into the VCs that we know here, to bring them to the large multinationals, to help them with the connections that you would do if you had a friend who started a business and says, can I have some help?
Come back to a couple of those points, but Joel, what does Endeavor do once you become an Endeavor entrepreneur?
Sure. So I failed to mention during the last question, our selection process lasts from 6 to 12 months. And there's actually a lot of feedback that goes into that process. So the first thing that we do is we do a needs assessment, and we say, okay, what was the feedback that was received through this process? And then what are the areas that you need to be working on? What are the areas that we can help you? And we basically put together a roadmap. Next thing that we do is we set up either a mentor, high-level mentor, or an advisory council. What we hear from most of our entrepreneurs is that capital is important, but at the end of the day, it's the softer stuff, as Andreas was mentioning, that's actually the most valuable. It's the high-level mentorship, the strategic guidance, it's the networks. We've got, for instance, an entrepreneur who has a company called Stone's Cherry. It's a fashion entrepreneur out of South Africa. We're able to connect her with Calvin Klein here. That's not, that's connecting her into our networks. That is what's valuable. we have a program called the Mentor Capital Program, where we're able to connect our entrepreneurs with international venture capitalists. It's great for the entrepreneur because many of them need some guidance going through raising capital. It's actually great for the venture capitalists because many of them want to be able to stick their toe in the water of these emerging markets and see there are phenomenal entrepreneurs out of these in these countries. And so it's just breaking down those barriers and enabling capital to flow more easily. But it's really the softer side of the support that we offer entrepreneurs. It's the mentorship, it's the global connections. That's really the greatest value that our entrepreneurs receive.
Yeah, so that's a big question, and it's too big to answer here, but maybe I can just talk about at least 4 levels at which we work with our social entrepreneurs. The first is funding. We are very individual focused, and our goal is when we find a social entrepreneur who becomes an Ashoka Fellow is to enable them to focus on their idea full-time for 3 years, after which generally that idea has taken off. And so that often comes, it's very individual. It often comes with individual personal financial support in form of a stipend over 3 years. In the early days, that often seems like the most compelling part of joining the fellowship is that you have that financial contribution and the opportunity to focus in that way. Quickly thereafter, people recognize the power and importance of joining networks. Networks in local countries, networks across countries, networks across stakeholder groups, and networks at all different levels. You know, we, for example, may well bring entrepreneurs who are working on the ground together with government officials who they otherwise would never have gotten a chance to interact with. So that's probably the second level of engagement and support that we provide to our entrepreneurs. More poignantly, I think, is that we are very focused on the pattern change. So we go very much beyond the organization. An Ashoka Fellow may work with one organization or 2 organizations, et cetera, but they're really focused on what that pattern change is, and they have very few contexts where they're engaging in a room with peers who are really focused just on pattern change. Not necessarily how do you grow your organization, how do you increase your profits. These may all be important things, but fundamentally to be accountable to changing the pattern in your society. And then fundamentally what we do with them is we engage with them to learn, to think together, and to act together to address the world's most pressing problems. So we don't actually go out with a definition of what the problems are. We seek to engage with our entrepreneurs to understand what the problems are, how we should be thinking about what the problems are, and then learning together how we should address those problems. This may, over a period of years, lead us to marshal a number of resources to addressing those problems in local context, but it's all based very much in concert in what we call collaborative entrepreneurship with our fellows.